So welcome everyone to the webinar. This is Speed Reading and Memorization Techniques. I'm Paul Novak. I'm the founder and program director here at Iris Reading, and I want to thank you for joining us. We're going to cover a lot of material in a relatively short period of time. So this is going to be like a speed reading workshop. Not entirely speed reading because we also we focus on memorization techniques. So let me get right to it. Here's what we're going to cover. You'll find out how fast you currently read, how to read faster with comprehension, how to read faster on the computer screen, how and when to take notes, and how to memorize information. Actually, this will be the first thing that we start with. A lot of what we do is speed reading techniques here at Iris, but you can't have reading without understanding and comprehension, and much more than that, remembering what you read. So we focus on all these areas. If you're not already familiar with us, we teach online, of course, and we also do our classes in person. So if you're in any of the following cities that you see here, you can actually check out one of our classes in person. They're usually on weekends. They're a little more comprehensive. They're typically 4-hour sessions on Saturdays or Sundays, and these are classes that we have open to the public. If you don't see your city listed here, you can reach out to us, go to the website, click Contact Us, or I'll have my contact information at the end of this webinar, and you can invite us to your campus, and we can organize something on campus or at your workplace. Of course, we do the classes online, and we are the largest provider of speed reading and memorization workshops. We've done them in over 50 cities across the U.S. I started this organization during my senior year of college, and let me give you a quick idea how I got involved teaching speed reading. I learned speed reading from a professor that I had during my freshman year of college, and what was going on was I was just falling behind in all my classes. I was a good student in high school, but I could not deal with the amount of college material that I had to read. It was over 100 pages every single week. And after about maybe 4 or 5 weeks, after seeing the grades that I was getting, I decided to meet with my professors to try to get some help. And one of my professors suggested I take a speed reading course. He said he took one in the past and it helped him out a lot. So I started looking for a speed reading course. I couldn't find any at the time. I went to school here in Chicago, graduated from DePaul University, and I couldn't find any speed reading courses. The one that he had originally taken, my professor, was no longer in existence. So I went back to my professor and I just asked him point blank, hey, can you teach me what you know about speed reading? And he's like, all right, come in during office hours and we'll work on it. And I remember my first session with him, I was at 190, so 190 words per minute. You're going to find out your reading speed very soon. And he also gave me a standardized reading test where I scored like a 60%. Not good, obviously. You know, like those reading tests that you have to take, like the ACT, things like that. And I always ran out of time on those tests. I was always more mathematically inclined. So we went through about 10 hours total of training, not in one day, but over the course of a few weeks. I'd come in on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and after a good, 9-10 hours of training, I went from 190 to 830 words a minute. So a little over 4 times faster. Now, what about comprehension? On the standardized reading test he gives me second time around, I went from 60% to 83%. Why? Because it was easy to finish the test this time. I didn't miss any questions. So this helped me tremendously going through school. During my sophomore year, I had to start working a full-time job. I had to help my parents out financially, and I didn't want to drop out of school, so I started working full-time and going to school full-time. I would not be able to juggle a 40-hour-a-week job and full-time school if I was still reading at 190 words a minute. So learning these skills helped me tremendously. The way I started teaching speed reading was I was a finance major, but in college you have a number of electives you can take, and I had one more elective I had to take. It's my final year in school, final semester, actually quarter. We were on a quarter system, and the only class that'll fit into my schedule in the evenings is an entrepreneurship class. So I decided to take it. And in that class, we had to come up with a business idea, write a business plan. And for lack of any other better ideas, I decided, because I'd get a lot of questions from friends and classmates that would see me reading. They'd ask me like, how are you skimming, or are you actually reading that fast? And I would give them little tips and techniques that I learned here and there, but a lot of it has to do with practicing certain types of drills and exercises. And because I got all these questions during that entrepreneurship class, I figured I'd start a little speed reading tutoring service on campus. I started posting some flyers, and one of the things I found was when I'd post some flyers on campus, students would contact me. I would teach them on weekends because I already had a full-time job. And one of the things I found was I just really loved teaching. So I kept on doing this when I graduated. It was kind of like a thing I did on the side. And I had a full-time job offer in finance. I took the job offer, and I kept working in finance for a number of years while developing Iris on the side. And little by little, this started to snowball and grow by word of mouth. We started teaching classes in multiple cities outside of Chicago. I started doing a lot more research, not just into speed reading, but also memory. How do you memorize information? And we've done these classes now in over 50 cities, from students at Harvard and Stanford to employees at NASA, Google, LinkedIn. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, reading underlies everything that we do. And it's so important to be able to do this more efficiently than average, because there's just a ton of information out there. So I think you'll find this very helpful. I wanted to give you some background on how I got involved with this, but our focus is still speed, comprehension, and retention. These three areas are necessary if you're going to start reading faster and comprehending the material well. So let's start with how to memorize information. There is a technique that the ancient Greeks used, and it's known as the memory palace technique. It's also sometimes referred to as the method of loci, or method of loci, and that has to do with the word location. And here's how it works. You take a location you're familiar with, let's say your home, or it could be your office, it could be campus, it could be your buddy's place. When you're first doing this technique, it's always good to start with the place where you're living right now, because that's probably the place you're most familiar with. And you basically create a walkthrough of your home. You have to decide 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. What is the first thing you encounter? Second thing, so imagine when you come home from school or work, the first thing you encounter, maybe it's the door. By the way, for some of you, this might be the garage. What's the second thing? What's the third room that you're walking through? Fourth. Now, the reason why you're doing this is because you have things to memorize. So here's an example. Let's say you had mailbox, front door, stairway, and let's say you see these green things over here that say topic. These are the things, let's say, that you need to memorize. The goal in this technique is to associate this topic with this location. Now, here's what's important. Your topic, it might be abstract, but you need to turn it into something visual. So whatever this topic is, you need to have a visual reminder, something that will remind you of what that information is about, and you need to associate it to the mailbox. And it's important that you make these associations a little exaggerated or weird or strange. Let me give you an example. Let's say your topic was technology. Let's say you're reading a chapter or an article, or let's say you have to do a presentation on technology, and your memory palace is your home, and these are your first 5 locations. And let's say these are your first 5, these are the 5 things you have to remember. And there might be more. You might have 12 things you have to remember. But just for sake of example, you have to associate Apple to mailbox. So with Apple, you can picture the fruit, you can picture iPhones, MacBooks. I would picture a bunch of apples overflowing from my mailbox. Now notice how this would never happen in real life. I hope not. It would be strange. But the reason why you want to picture something weird is because you'll remember it better. Anything that's out of the ordinary is much more memorable. So another option is you might picture, imagine if there were like 20 or 30 iPhones inside of your mailbox when you opened it up. That would be kind of crazy, right? Same thing with number 2. If it's the front door that your location is, well, and you have to remember Amazon, I would picture a giant box being delivered onto my front door from Amazon. Now, you could also picture something related to the actual Amazon rainforest. Stairway, if Facebook was number 3, I would picture, Mark Zuckerberg sitting on my stairway checking his Facebook. And the same thing, you can see where this is going. With Twitter, I'd picture a bunch of bluebirds flying around my living room. With Netflix, I would picture a flat screen TV in the middle of my hallway playing maybe House of Cards. And by the way, you want to be specific with these visuals, because the more specific and vivid they are in your mind, the easier it is to remember things. Now, why are we doing this? Why are we going through all this trouble to visualize the information? Well, the way your brain works and the way your memory works, you remember things that are visual much more easily than abstract information or verbal information. Your verbal recall is not nearly as strong as your visual recall. And I'll give you a good example of when this happens. You ever forget someone's name? Of course you have. Everyone has. And it could be awkward sometimes when you forget someone's name almost immediately after they told you it. Some of you might have forgotten my name already after I told you at the beginning of the presentation. But here's the more important thing for you to understand. You're much more likely to remember that person's face, right? If you met someone and then you ran into them again a week from now, you're more likely to remember their face than their name. Why? Because the face is visual information. The name is verbal information. It's more abstract. So what we need to do for memorization, we need to convert and transfer whatever is abstract, turn it into visual, and if we can associate it to locations, then you could remember things in order. And the great thing about the memory palace technique is it also works with situations where you have to remember details. Because, you know, something like this, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, this might not be particularly hard to remember, but what if you have to remember 3 details associated with Amazon? Well, whatever these subtopics are, all you have to do is place them. Again, you need a visual for each subtopic, a visual reminder of each subtopic, and they need to be placed in 3 areas of the front door. So think about your front door. You might have, for me, my front door has like a little window at the top. It has a peephole, and there's also the door handle. So I would put those 3 things in those 3 particular areas. So the other benefit here, what if you're coming into finals and you got, you know, let's say you had this thing on technology that we were just talking about you had to remember, but you also have a class on history and you got to remember a bunch of stuff from there. You got something with chemistry, physics, and maybe you have a bunch of classes and you've got tests coming up and you need to organize all this information. Well, you can create multiple memory palaces to house that information. So one memory palace might be your place, another might be your parents' place, another might be your buddy's place. You could also use the place where you work. You could use campus. There's a lot of options here when you're dealing with memory palaces. And I'll give you a good example of where I was coaching a student that was done with law school and they were now preparing for the bar exam. And what she was doing, you know, the topic of law, there are many, many areas of law. There's contract law, real estate law, there's constitutional law. There's a whole bunch of detail that needs to be memorized for a bar exam. What she was doing was she was, you know, constitutional law had one particular memory palace. Maybe it was her home. Contract law had another memory palace. Maybe it was her friend's place, and so on and so forth. And the great thing is, if you have a lot of detail, you can put it in these memory palaces. Your if kitchen was number 5, and you have 5 sub-details that you need to remember, well, your kitchen has multiple areas, right? Your kitchen has, you know, maybe the fridge, the countertop, the microwave, the oven, the toaster, and so on. And you can even go deeper. This girl that was preparing for the bar exam, she was going as far as putting things in her fridge as visual reminders. So she had like a topic of, let's say, constitutional law, and then a subtopic of constitutional law was in her kitchen, and a subtopic of that was her fridge. A subtopic of that was the freezer and the, you know, the main part of the fridge. And then you could even go deeper. She was going as deep as putting things on and in her gallon of milk, just to give you now that's a power user of the memory palace. You know, hopefully it doesn't come to that where you need to, but if you're preparing for the bar exam in the future, you might want to consider that an option. What's the other option? I'll tell you, a lot of students don't have strategies for how they're going to memorize information. They just hope that if they read it over and over again, it'll somehow sink in. Now, it's true that, you know, if you do brute force repetition, for example, just reading something over and over 1,000,000 times, you'll eventually, you know, memorize it. But it takes a long time, a lot of effort, and something like this doesn't take nearly as much time. Now, initially when you're doing this, if you're new to memory palaces, it might take you a little longer just because you're not as familiar with it, but the more you start doing it, the faster you start getting at creating these visuals, and it's a great way. Remember, this was a technique practiced by the ancient Greeks. Back then, you didn't have hard drives to store information, right? You didn't have, you know, I've got so many pens, I don't know what to do with them, you know, just pen and paper is a method of, you know, recording and storing information. Back then, you didn't have all these options, so they actually had techniques for memorizing information. So I hope you utilize this particular technique for remembering information. Some people will do notes. You know, notes can definitely help you remember to an extent. You write something down, it does help you remember, but there are good and bad ways to take notes. Here's what you shouldn't do. And if you've ever bought a used college textbook, you know exactly what I mean when I show you this. Excessive highlighting, how does it happen? What's going on here is someone's reading, maybe they got a test coming up tomorrow, and they read a sentence and they're like, huh, that's kind of important. I'm going to highlight that. And then they read the next sentence and they're like, huh, that's kind of important too. You know, I'm going to highlight that as well. And then they read the third sentence, and lo and behold, this sentence is way more important than the previous two. Of course, they got to highlight that as well. Maybe they'll use a different color, but you see where this is going. You ever hear the expression, when you get caught up in details, you lose sight of the big picture? I think we've all heard this before. And this is a good example of what's going on when people are taking notes too often. Or it's just a general problem with reading. People get so caught up in details that they lose sight of the big picture. And if you don't have the big picture in mind, the details don't even matter. So I'm not trying to diminish the importance of details. It's very important. But if you're going to take notes or even highlight, nothing's wrong with highlighting, wait until you finish a paragraph first. Or maybe finish a section before you take any notes. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself taking so much notes that you barely make a dent or any progress in this chapter. I'd recommend no more than 20% of your time should be spent on note-taking. So that means if you were studying for an hour, you wouldn't want to spend more than 12 minutes of note-taking. Now, of course, this also depends on your purpose. If your purpose was to write a paper, well then, because your purpose is to write a paper, you might spend more time taking notes because you're plotting out how you're going to write this thing. Now, another important thing to note is that how you take notes matters too. You know, I've got notebooks from when I was in high school. I don't know why I haven't thrown them out yet, but I've got these notebooks where it's just like chicken scratch in there. I had no kind of idea of how to go about note-taking. And I would look at my notes, and sometimes they weren't organized. They were not beneficial enough to review them later. So you might want to consider mind mapping as an option. Mind maps require you to have some kind of a central idea, and then you have these little spokes coming out. These, this might be the chapter title in the middle. And this might be section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, and so on. If you want order, you can go in a clockwise manner. But sections sometimes have subsections, so your mind map can have details associated with those bigger ideas. And the reason why they call it mind mapping is because it reflects the way your mind works a lot better than just, traditional linear notes. Your mind doesn't work in a linear fashion. Your mind works in a very non-linear way. And also, remember we said visual information is easier to remember. This is actually plotted out in a visual manner. So if you're looking at, obviously mind mapping can be done just by pen and paper, but you could also create mind maps on your computer. There are dozens of mind mapping programs out there. I've tried a lot of them. One of my favorite ones is XMind. This is actually, if you're looking for a free mind mapping tool, I would highly recommend this one. It's free. You can download it for your Mac or PC. They also have a cloud-based, a web-based version. But XMind's a pretty good program. It's xmind.net where you can get that mind mapping program. And that's not to say that this is hands down the best tool out there. There are a lot of them out there, but I've worked with a number of them, and this is probably one of the better ones, and it's free. Let's talk about how fast you read. We're not going to talk about it. We're actually going to figure it out. I'm going to have an article displayed on the screen in a moment here, and I'm going to time you to read. Well, we're only going to read for a minute. We want to find out your reading speed, which is measured in words per minute. So we're only going to read for a minute, and we'll see how many words you read in that minute. Now, you're going to hear my timer go off at the end of the 60 seconds, so let me put 60 seconds on the clock here. So I've got a minute on the clock. That's how my timer sounds. And I do realize there is like a subtle delay between the sound and maybe when I switch my slides. So this will be more or less, for the most part, somewhat accurate, I think. But for those of you viewing the recording, this will be very accurate because the recording should record exactly from my screen. But I do understand when we're doing this live, sometimes when I switch slides, the audio and the slides are not always matching up perfectly. So I'm going to switch my slide right now to the article. Now, don't start reading the article yet. Once you see it on your screen, do not start reading it yet, because I'm going to start my timer. It usually takes a little bit of time before the audio and the syncing of the article show up. So I'm just giving it a few moments. Don't start reading yet. I want you to read the way you normally would. Okay? So you're starting at the beginning. There's just 4 paragraphs here. Read. Don't go too fast. And also don't go too slow. Read at whatever speed feels comfortable. Ready, set, and go. All right, go ahead and stop. Look at the line where you stopped. And you see those numbers on the side? Those numbers will guide you into figuring out your reading speed. So let's say you stopped at the end of, let's say right here, the second paragraph, this line where it says even. Well, that would be 249. This just means there's 249 words from the beginning all the way to that last line on that last word on that line. Of course, if you finish the second paragraph, there's one more word there, so that's 250. If you want to be extremely precise, you may have ended on this word emails, and maybe you didn't read these last 3 words. Well, just subtract 3 from that number, and you'll get your exact speed. So write that somewhere. Make sure you take note of it, because I'm going to switch slides right now, and we will measure your reading speed again. So make sure you write that number down just for comparison reasons. Okay, so that was 1 minute of reading. And actually, let's do a quick little poll. We don't have, let's see, we don't have like 1 million people in this webinar. We actually had hundreds that registered. But I want to launch a quick little poll to find out how fast the people in this webinar were reading. So let me launch the poll. And you should see a quick poll on your screen. You can go ahead and start voting. Please select how fast you were reading. So from your screen, you should see a few options there. Go ahead and give you guys a few more moments to vote here. All right, I'm going to close it now. All right, let me share the results with you. Here's where most people landed in the 200 to 299 range. That was 41%. Some of you were above average, 300 to 399. Very good. And some of you were a little, on this end. By the way, if you're wondering what the average was, I'll show you that and we'll discuss it in a moment. 100 to 199 was 29%. These were our results. And let me hide these and go back to the slides because I want to go over the average. This is the average reading speed for adults in the U.S. So let me explain a little bit about this. This is for adults in the U.S. It doesn't take into account your education level. So anyone 18 and up in the U.S., 150 to 250 is the general average. If you're college educated, the average is a little higher. It's 200 to 300. And interestingly enough, that's what we saw where most of you, I think it was like 49%, that was the highest amount in that range. And then we had some people, I think it was like 20-some%, a little above, 300 to 399. And some of you were 100 to 199. So just keep this in mind. Obviously, if we had, grade school kids, the average is lower. And this also depends on the type of material that you read. So this average, keep in mind, is based on medium level material. Something like this is medium level. Not too easy, not too hard, right? And if you were reading technical material, your speed would probably drop. So your reading speed is not really one number. It's more like a range. Sometimes you go a little faster if the material is easy. Sometimes you go a little slower if it's a little harder. The goal of our classes and the courses that we provide is to move a student's reading range higher. So even in that technical material, even if you're reading it at a slower pace, you can still improve the reading speed at which you go through technical material, whether it's material, if you're studying law, medicine, something very, very complex, it is possible to improve your speed in that kind of material as well. So let's move on now. I want to talk about the easiest way to start reading faster. How do we start getting results? Well, easiest thing you could do right now is start using your hand as a guide. And here's why. Your eyes are naturally attracted to motion. So if you move your hand or your finger or even your pen from left to right, line by line, your eyes will naturally follow. Now, by the way, I'm saying left to right because we're talking about reading in English here, right? Not all languages go from left to right when they're reading. But in English, we go left to right. Nothing's wrong with that. And if you use your hand or pen to guide your eyes, you'll have better focus because your eyes focus on things that are moving. I'll give you an example. Imagine there was a bee flying around in your room right now. A bee. It would be a little distracting, right? One, because it's a bee, and two, because anything that moves around will just naturally get our attention. So when you're using your hand as a guide, it's a good way to trick yourself into paying more attention to the material you're reading. Now, The other reason you want to use your hand as a guide is because your eyes will zero in and focus on whatever it is you're pointing to. Now, I do understand that using your hand as a guide is not always practical. So if you're reading on the computer screen, nobody wants to be dragging their finger across the screen. So I want to give you an alternative. I mean, you could try to use your mouse, I guess, but that's not always practical if you're, on a laptop. Or what if you have a touch screen? Using your hand as a guide is not going to work very well. So I want to show you how you can read faster on the screen. Let me pull up this is our website, by the way. If you're interested in more classes, you go to online courses over here or in-person classes. And if you want to invite us to your campus, click on Contact Us. Let's take some sample reading material from something very technical. We'll use The Onion. World scientists admit they just don't like mice. Let's say we have to read this very dense piece of information. And what I want you to, here's how you use, there's an application that we developed. It's a free speed reading tool. And all you got to do to use it is copy the text that you want to read. So I've copied all this information from this article. And the tool is called Accelerator. And if you go to accelerator.com, this is what the website looks like. It's a free speed reading tool. And basically, it's a text box where you can paste your information. This is some sample text. I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to paste the new information that we just copied. I'll click Begin. And I want you to focus here in the middle. These are the first two words of the article. When I click Read, these words are going to be blinking on the screen at the speed that we set. Now, the default speed on this application is 300 words per minute. We wanted to set it just a little higher than average. And if you're wondering what the average is, the average reader reads a little slower on the computer screen. I saw one study a number of years ago that said it was comparing people reading on desktop computers versus on the printed page, and they found that the average person was reading about 32% slower on the screen. So the average reading speed is closer to 150 when people are reading on the screen. So let's see if you can keep up at 300. We're going to read this article, just a few paragraphs. World scientists admit they just don't like mice. And let's read a few paragraphs just to see how this application works. And another disclaimer here is, since we are live streaming this and there is a little bit of a delay, or if your internet is choppy, or if my internet gets choppy while we're doing this, you might see some inconsistency with the way the words are being blinked. That will not happen if you're doing this on your own. But for the most part, this should work pretty smoothly. Let's try it out. We'll just do a few paragraphs and try to keep up here at 300 words a minute. Here we go. Okay, I'll stop it there. I think you guys get the idea. Notice how I was blinking 2 words at a time. That's something you can change in your settings. Let me show you the settings real quick, just a few things. First of all, most importantly, words per minute. How fast do you want to read? 300 words a minute? You can change that. That was the default. Chunk size, this is how many words do you want to see. We had that at 2. I set that up at 2 just to kind of prove to you that you can read groups of words. Most people read word by word. And that's a problem, because once you get fluent in a language, you can speed up by reading groups of words. There's a number of other settings you can explore on your own, but I wanted to share this with you guys because it is free. It's a speed reading tool that we developed at Iris, and it's called Accelerator. You can get it at accelerator.com, and we are in the process of also turning this into an iPhone and Android app and an iPad app, and also making other advanced functionalities with this. So check it out when you get a chance. We're going to move on now to other techniques. I don't want to spend too much time on any one of these things because I want to pack in as much as we can in this short webinar that we have. Let's think about how most people read. You see this little dot bouncing around, this little green dot from word to word? Most people, like I was saying, they read word by word. And you ever do one of these where you're reading and you're like, wait, hold on, I don't know what I'm reading here. Let me back up. Hold on. Ah, yes, there we go. We've all done that. There are basically 3 old reading habits that we want to change if we're going to start reading faster. One of them is called fixation. This is like I told you earlier. Most people read word by word. If you can start reading groups of words, you'll start reading faster. And that is part of what learning to read faster is all about. Grabbing groups of words rather than, continuing to do a word by word basis. Also, the habit of regression, that's going back to reread material. This has a lot to do with your level of focus. And think about it this way. If you ever read a whole page of text and you're like, I have no clue what I just read. Let's say you were the average reader and you read it at 200 words a minute. Now you got to read the material again, and let's say you read it again at 200 words a minute. So how fast is your reading speed? Is it 200 words a minute? Well, not exactly. Your effective reading speed was 100 words a minute because you read it twice at 200 words per minute. So it's, this habit slows people down from getting through their material. And there's a third habit called subvocalization. Here's what this is. Remember when you were first learning how to read, your teacher had you get up in front of class and you had to read out loud? Do you remember this dreadful experience? I say dreadful because I used to hate reading out loud because English is not my first language. My first language is Polish. Both of my parents are immigrants from Poland, and I was born in Chicago, but I grew up speaking only Polish, and I didn't start learning English until I was like 5 or 6 years old. Now, the good news is you don't have to read out loud forever, right? I used to hate reading out loud because I'd always mess up on words. And eventually your teacher says, okay, stop reading out loud and instead do what? Say the words silently in your head. So you know that voice you hear in your head while you're reading? That's subvocalization. Have you noticed voices in your head while you're reading? Yes. And it doesn't mean you're crazy. I mean, it's your voice, right? If it's another voice, you might be in the wrong session here. But that voice you hear in your head is common among all readers. The problem with it is this. Do you have to say the word in your head to understand what that word means? Not necessarily. I'll give you an example of when you read without saying words in your head. It happens all the time when you're driving. When you drive and you see a stop sign, do you actually say stop in your head? Probably not. You see the stop sign, you see the word, you kind of know what it means. I know this, the shape of the sign and the colors that hints at the, meaning as well. But same thing, think about all the billboards you see on a daily basis, advertisements. When you walk by a Starbucks, it says Starbucks coffee. You don't actually say Starbucks coffee every time you walk by a Starbucks. It just kind of, you see it and you know it, right? So this habit actually slows you down. If you think about it, if you're saying all the words in your head, that means you're only going to read as fast as you talk. And that's a problem because there is a limit to how fast you can talk. You can try to train yourself to talk faster, like auctioneers or people that do disclaimers at the end of commercials. Those people are talking at really fast rates. Those can be rates in the 300s or more, but you can't really read that fast if you just train yourself to talk fast. Think instead of your talking speed. You don't want to be limited by that. Because most people would reach limits of around around 400 words a minute. That's a very, very fast talking speed. Most people wouldn't be able to go beyond that. What about your thinking speed? You can think a lot faster than you can talk, without a doubt. So we have to change these habits. And how do we get better at reading? It's kind of weird to say, how do you get better at reading? You read so much, you might not even think of it as a skill, but it is. How do you get better at anything? Practice. So we're talking about practice here. And let me explain what I mean by practice when we're talking about practice in regards to reading. There are specific speed drills you can do that will help you to increase your reading rate. And the drill I'm going to discuss right now is just one type of drill. There are a lot of different types of drills out there, and we cover a lot of them in our online and in-person courses, but I want to give you an idea of how one of them works. The goal is to purposely go faster than you would normally read. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do one sample drill here. Actually, we'll do a few, just so you can kind of get the hang of it. This is the same article from before. Remember you were reading for 1 minute? Now, I asked you, to read for a minute and you got up to a certain point. Let's say you finished the first 3 paragraphs. Well, the drill is going to be 40 seconds. What I want you to do is start back at the beginning, and I want you to reread the material that you already read in 40 seconds. So that means you have to go faster than you read earlier. Now, it shouldn't be that hard, right? Because you already read it. So, of course, you'll go faster the second time around. Make sure that you're seeing the words at a faster rate. That's the goal of the drill. Let's try it out for our first drill. I'm going to put 40 seconds on the clock here. And try to make sure you get to the point that you read up to previously in 40 seconds. Let's try it out. Ready, set, and go. And stop. Okay, how'd you do? Did you make it to that line that you read up to before? That was 40 seconds. If you did, very good. And if you didn't, no worries. You're going to go faster. Actually, all of you have to go faster. I'm only going to give you 30 seconds now to do the exact same thing. But you need to go a little faster. So we're going to start at the beginning again. And the goal of this exercise, even though we're going over the same material, is to get used to seeing words at a rapid pace, to get your eyes to see words quickly. So essentially, I want you to skim what you read earlier. Don't worry if you feel like you missed some things. You already read it earlier anyway. I want you to basically fly through this material in 30 seconds. Let's try it out. Get to the same point that you previously read up to. When we measured your reading speed for a minute, you have to get to that point in 30 seconds. Ready, set, and go. And stop. Okay, so that was 30 seconds. If you made it there, very good. Let's make the drill a little more challenging. So these were the first four articles, first four paragraphs of this article. I'm going to show you the rest of the article. Let me zoom out. And this is the entire article right here. So there are two more paragraphs here you haven't yet read. So, or actually, you may not have read all of this initially, but I want you to start at the beginning, even though I know this is kind of zoomed out. Make sure your screen is as big as you can make it so you can see the text. You're going to have 1 minute to get from the beginning of this article to the end of it. There are 581 words in this article. So essentially, I want you to go 581 words per minute. Okay? Now, there's new material here you haven't read. I want you to skim that material. Don't worry if you don't get all the detail. The goal of this exercise is to see words at a very rapid pace, much faster than you would normally read them. Okay? Let's try it out. Try to get through the entire article in 1 minute. Ready, set, and go. All right, that was a minute. And if you made it through, very good. Here's what we're going to do now. We're going to go back to normal reading. I'm going to pull up another article here, and you are going to read normally. So what I mean by that now, we're not doing a speed drill anymore. On this article, we're going to read for good comprehension. So this article is called How Distraction Hurts Creativity. Same author, same, very similar writing style. You're going to read for a minute, and don't go super fast. I want you to go at whatever speed feels comfortable. Okay? Now, don't go super slow either. I want you to go, go at whatever speed feels comfortable enough so you can understand the material. Okay, we're going to read for 1 minute, and then I'm going to stop you. Ready, set, and go. Okay, let me stop you right there. That was 1 minute. Go ahead and take a look at the line where you stopped and take note of your reading speed. Again, these numbers will tell you how many words are up to the final word on that line, starting from the beginning. So write that number down and compare it to what you had before. When I say before, I mean earlier in the webinar, we tested your reading speed. And by the way, we only did 3 drills here. When we have longer courses, we usually do a lot more than this. But actually, I'm just curious, did you make an improvement? And if you did, very good. If you didn't, that's okay. We only did 3 drills, but sometimes people make improvements after just a few drills. Let's see. Actually, I want to run let me run a little poll here. On your screen, you should see a poll that pops up. Did you read faster this time around? Type a yes or no if you read faster. Give you guys a few more moments to fill in the poll here because we're running low on time. Okay. All right, let me share the results real quick with you. 92% of you said you read faster. Very good. Now, a few of you didn't read faster. That's okay. It's only 3 drills that we did. And if we did more of these drills, I'm pretty sure you would make improvements. But I want to explain to you how these drills work because it's important to understand. I like to compare the drills to driving a car on the highway. You know, when you're on the highway, you're going maybe, let's say, 70 miles an hour. And eventually, when you get off the highway, and you know that first street off the highway, how does it feel? Doesn't it feel kind of slow? Now, why does it feel slow? Because you got used to going 70. Sometimes you get off the highway and you're still going 40 or 50 because it feels like you're going a lot slower than that. So these drills are very much the same. When you're doing the speed drills, it's like being on the highway, so to speak. You get used to seeing words at a very rapid pace. Why? Because you want to push yourself to see words very quickly, get your eyes used to that. And when you get off the highway, when you go back to normal reading for comprehension, it won't feel as fast because you got used to practicing at a much faster rate. So if you are interested in continuing to practice, there's a few options here. You could either take one of our longer online courses, if you go to irisreading.com, or an in-person class. Let me just give you a heads up on what these courses entail. There are a lot of drills and exercises in them. And if you take one of the online courses, you can just go up to the website and click on online courses up there. If you want to take one of the in-person classes, they're available in these cities. Now, these are not the only cities where we have classes going on. Actually, we have a lot more going on that are not listed here, but they're not listed because we're doing them at companies. They're private to the employees, or we're doing them on college campuses. So if you want to reach out to us and help us organize a session on campus, feel free to get in touch. You can click on the Contact Us page of irisreading.com. And the live in-person classes are normally $299. We have a special for $199, and you could actually save even more money if you sign up with a friend. So it's 2 for $299, 3 for $399. And this includes, by the way, supplemental materials that also include some free access to speed reading software. This is an $89 software program that we include, and it's a good way to continue practicing on your own beyond the courses that we do on weekends. Also, people can retake the classes as much as they want. The online courses, those are video tutorials. You can either take our foundation course. This has about 4 hours of training content on it. Our mastery course, that has over 7 hours of content. And by the way, when I say content, I mean video tutorials. You can watch them at your leisure. And the reason why there's multiple hours is because, you know, this takes practice to develop these skills. There's a lot of exercises in each one of these courses that will help you make those gains. And the great thing about it is you could utilize those exercises on your own reading material that you're dealing with school. There's also an advanced comprehension and memory course. If you feel like you need to zero in and focus on comprehension and memorization, by the way, you can take all three of these. We have a bundle value where you could save some money taking all three. So that's just at online courses if you go to irisreading.com. Summary of what we covered today: how fast you currently read. We talked about how to read faster with those practice exercises, reading faster on the computer screen, note-taking, and the memory palace technique. I hope you found that helpful. If you like memorization techniques like that, there's a number of them in our online courses and in-person classes that a lot of people find helpful, because most people have been told, you know, memorize this, memorize that, but how many times have you been taught, here's how you memorize something? So I hope you guys found this webinar helpful. I tried to cover a lot of information in a very short period of time. We're going to stick around and do a Q&A if you do have any questions for me. I'm going to stop the recording in a moment here because we will be sending this out. And I want to thank you so much for attending the webinar. If you like what we're doing here at Iris Reading, I hope you tell your friends about us. And if you don't like what we're doing here at Iris Reading, please tell your enemies about us, because that'll show them. So thank you so much for attending, and stick around if you have any questions. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.